We got stress because we're striving, surviving, keep on moving to a
Welcome everybody to Minding the Gap, a video and podcast series from Behavioral Sciences of Alabama. I am joined by, as usual, by Dr. David Barnhart and by Dave Barnhart, who are related. So welcome to both of you this morning. We're going to talk about religion and mental health. It's not controversial at all.
Nothing is controversial about the combination of religion and mental health. I've heard it said, Paul, by some clients that I've seen that the teaching of their particular church says that all you need is Jesus.
Just need God in your life.
Yeah. So you don't need medicine.
Mm-hmm.
And you certainly don't need therapy.
Yeah.
Well, I jumped right in that one, didn't I, Paul?
Yeah.
So,
Well, mental health started out as the idea of demons, and getting rid of the demons. That's where our profession started. Am I right about that?
well, perhaps that's true.
Well, that's one of the things I learned when I was in
Yeah.
school is that, that the idea of, there was this mental health issues where, there was some kind of a spirit or demon inside a person. And the idea was to get that out. There was all kinds of rituals that they would do and these kinds of things. And eventually people figured out that getting in salt baths and doing all these things were really didn't make any difference at all. And science eventually took over. And, because we've talked about this before, when we don't have information, our minds make it up.
Yes.
And so the information was early, people are suffering from some mental problem that they're just not, that something is not going like most people. And so there has to be some explanation for it. So a demon would be without information. Maybe that is true. And we've since learned that it's people have different chemistry in their brains that, creates these kinds of things. And, we have a lot more, knowledge now, but mental health and religion have always been connected and still are.
Very, very connected in helpful ways. I should say that the other Dave Barnhart has he's actually Dr. Dave Barnhart. He's got a PhD from Vanderbilt in religion and ethics. Am I getting that right, Dave? So
yeah, that's correct.
Yes, and he has written on mental health and religion, or religion and mental health. I think maybe that was flip that around a little bit. I don't know, Dave. Do you have any?
Well, I think it's interesting when you kind of look at the history of how people have thought about mental disorders. Yeah, there was definitely, for a while people thought demonic possession, and then once people started looking more scientifically, they talked about the humors of the body, which is where we get adjectives like sanguine, which really just means blood, but sanguine means happy or cheerful, or choleric because you're colicky, you're kind of grumpy. Or so people thought if your humors are out of balance, then your mental state might be out of balance, and they started looking that direction. And then, I guess probably the people point to Freud being the first real person who really looked at psychologists. But even as Paul was saying, he was in a large extent, he was making up a story to fit the various pathologies he was seeing. It was a pretty good story because had a lot of staying power. And there's even some, now that we can look at the actual function of people's brains, we can say, oh yeah, there actually is quite a bit of unconscious processing that's happening in people's brains And so I think part of what we're, these days we're in a really exciting place where we're, in a way sort of doing a philosophical, scientific, religious perspective on what does it mean to be a human person. And I think that's kind of where these things come together. Questions of meaning, and not just what makes people screwed up, whether it's demonic possession or trauma or chemical imbalances, but how do we thrive? What's the best way for people to be at their best? And I think all those are questions that you really, if you just look at it from a neurobiological perspective, you're going to miss something. If you just look at it from a spiritual, religious perspective, you're going to miss something. You really kind of need a holistic view of that kind of thing. That's where I think religion and mental health are most interesting, when they kind of bring us into those existential big questions. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things that we have been tuned into because of what we do, we have an intensive outpatient treatment program for obsessive-compulsive disorder. And one of the ways that OCD manifests itself is in religious or moral scrupulosity, where people obsess about their faith or their moral position. Did I do the right thing? Am I a good enough person? Did I blaspheme God? Have I committed some kind of sin that's going to doom me? And a variety of other things.
Even the thoughts, having a thought of a sinful thought becomes bothersome and makes it necessary for the person to do something to alleviate that feeling of, oh my gosh, I've done something wrong. I've got to do something to correct this right now.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting because I think, a lot of times, I think the words were meant helpfully when Jesus is preaching the Sermon on the Mount, and he says, he's talking to people, and he says to his male disciples, if you look at a woman with lust, you've already committed adultery with her in your heart. And so he's moving adultery from sort of the act into the thought of it. And that was intended to help kind of even the playing field, so that
include everybody.
Yeah, so you're not as judgmental of other people, right? But unfortunately, people hear that and they become more judgmental of themselves, because now they're policing their thoughts.
Oh my gosh, I
time.
can't have that thought. I'm a sinner. I've committed adultery, and it's the whole idea is that the thoughts, you can't help having those.
Yes, yeah, and we do know, like, you can train yourself to think certain ways, but if you're policing and you have anxiety about, oh my gosh, I've had a lustful thought, I need to go repent, then all you're doing is reinforcing those patterns. So, in other words, if you're angry with a brother or sister, you've committed murder, right? It's not meant to say, it's meant to help you kind of think about what leads to a more peaceful life with my neighbors. It's not meant for you to, like, people are gonna piss you off. It's you're a human being. You're gonna get angry. It's just so that you're less judgmental of murderers, and you're like, okay, well, I'm working on myself. I'm not worried about other people. And while I love the Sermon on the Mount, I think that those particular verses in the Bible cause people a lot of stress.
And it's interesting how that can go either way. It can create empathy, or it can create judgment.
Yes.
Based on your interpretation of it.
And I think so much of
people interpret it in so many different ways. And when it becomes legalistic, and that's when we have a problem. That's when people get stuck in a certain way of thinking that's just not helpful to our human connections with other people and ourselves.
And it's not just
Yeah.
OCD where that might become an issue. So you could be judging yourself and not be obsessing or compulsing, but you could be depressing yourself or making yourself more anxious about your own thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things I think is interesting, I think maybe you remember the author of the book, the one that talked about the doubting disease, that talked about.
Yes.
So do you remember the author's name? I can't remember.
I'll think about it. I'll come up with it.
So the funny thing is he looked at the letters of these people in monasteries in the Middle Ages, and because you would have people go join a monastery, and if you've made a big life decision, like I'm going to be celibate and live a voluntary life of poverty. I mean, there's people are either very hardcore or there's something at their and that could be a very spiritual, intrinsically motivated thing, or it could be that someone is not able to function in society, and so they're thinking, maybe I can go function in a monastery. I can't. So they go to a monastery. People seek out religion sometimes because they have these mental difficulties, and so the religious professionals, the abbots of these monasteries, recognize that a lot of their young initiates had serious hang-ups about stuff. So even one of them was Martin Luther, who is famously started the Protestant, Reformation in the 1500s. He would go and he would confess multiple times a day, because he would go and confess, and then he'd feel clean or pure, and he'd go and have a nasty thought, and then he'd feel like he had to come back and confess. And his abbot, the superior at the monastery, said, "Look, dude, you can only come confess once a day. You're wearing me out." and really, like, for Martin, that was to have that support was important, because then he began to understand that God wasn't looking over his shoulder like a scorekeeper, that really it was all about grace. And his personal revolution started, his personal conversion started this global movement, which became the Protestant Reformation, because he was like, no, this isn't about law, it's about grace. It's about, God doesn't want you to live this kind of life. So one of his big insights in his journal is, he says he was overwhelmed by the light. He would be standing in the light and it would reveal all his flaws. And he wrote how horrified he was of the light, how terrified he was of the light. And then he finally realized the light wasn't God, it was the devil. And like, what a big revelation that was for him. It was like, this is not how God treats you. So, I think that's, again, I don't want people to go away thinking, oh, it's everything I feel bad must be from demons. But I think it was an understanding of, I got to turn this thing around and look at it differently. And suddenly he had this freedom. So I think that was a form of therapy his abbot did for him.
Oh, yes. Yes. If you limit behavior, we call it resisting compulsions, what you experience is a decrease in anxiety. Initially, an increase, because you're going against what it is that you think is supposed to give you relief. Maybe it's to confess your sins repeatedly, or to go to somebody to confess, or to do a certain amount of prayer until it feels right, or some other kind of thing. When you resist doing that and become successful with it, eventually the discomfort decreases, because you've stopped reinforcing the pattern of behavior. And so people then, and we, Paul and I and you, we've experienced this with people as they begin to resist these additional religious things, which kind of goes against the idea of grace. You got to do certain things in a certain way in order to be okay. They can experience joy in their religious faith rather than being triggered by it.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, it occurs to me that kind of what you're indicating there is that scrupulosity really it causes suffering, and it really gets away from the main idea. I mean, if you look across religious, not just Christian, but Buddhist and Hindu and other kinds of, the great religions of the world really are partially about helping you get over yourself. That the idea is, like Jesus says, look at the birds, look at the lilies. They're not worried about tomorrow.
Why are you
Paul
worried about this?
Yeah, don't worry about, Paul talks about the peace that passes understanding. And, the Buddha says, that you're trying to quiet the monkey mind that's running here and there, scampering all around and finding things to be anxious and worried about. He talks about how we manufacture our own suffering. So you look across religions, the idea is to get over yourself, and scrupulosity gets you wrapped up in yourself. It gets you tangled up in your thoughts and second guessing yourself. And, you're wanting certainty. Here's the other thing is you're wanting certainty about something, and faith is all about uncertainty, like being okay with uncertainty. That's a hard
Trusting.
Yeah.
Trusting something beyond yourself.
Expand on uncertainty, Paul.
Okay, well, that's that's the big bugaboo with any anxiety. It sort of demands certainty, whether it's I'm going to be okay. If somebody has an anxious anxiety about their health or getting in an accident or something happening to someone or whatever it is, accepting uncertainty is always a big obstacle. And this desire for it is a never-ending path. So accepting uncertainty is a big part of really any kind of therapy for anxiety. But it goes against what we said, goes against our nature, because we want that. We want to be certain that our kids are going to do well. We want to be certain that we're going to be successful. We want to be certain that everything's going to be okay. And so where's the gap there between the certainty and the uncertainty? It's, how do we fill that up?
Right. And we, when it comes to these kind of questions, it's very difficult to adjust to ambiguity. It's easier to adjust to something that we can count on. We know for sure that it's going to be a certain way. But ambiguity is difficult. And we think that it probably, most of these issues kind of go back to the concept of protecting ourselves to make sure that we're going to live. And living becomes more than just, am I going to get eaten by a saber-toothed tiger? It's what my position is in my family and my community, and how I think about myself. It's got a lot of variables. If you think about, most of the time, most of us behave as if we are certain of things on other issues. Like often we'll get in an automobile and drive somewhere across country, not really concerned too much about dying in an automobile. And I think we kill something like 30,000 people a year in an automobile.
It may happen.
Yeah.
It may happen.
But we get in the car and we run down to the grocery store, no problem.
Because, and the idea is what I need from the grocery store is bigger than the fear that I have of getting in an accident.
Yeah.
That my need to go to work is bigger than my fear of getting an accident, because I could.
And if you engage in the behavior enough, you desensitize or habituate to it, so it doesn't feel risky.
I talk about that sometimes with my experience in baseball. My desire and my enjoyment of hitting the ball was much bigger than my fear of getting hit by it. It's just, that's just the way it was. But some people just get so wrapped up in that fear
Mhm.
that gets in the way of whatever that they're doing. And so it's winning, which side is winning. Do I want certainty so bad that I get so wrapped up into it that I've become do all these things to kind of create this false notion of certainty. I mean, elections, we don't know. We don't know what are these people, everybody's doing at the polls and all these, we don't know it. We can't know everything about what the government's doing. We can't know everything about. Dave, you know a lot about religion. You studied it at the highest level. You don't know everything.
I don't
do
know
you?
anything. I know
You
less
know
and
enough to
less.
know how much you don't know.
Right.
And so there's that gap between that and being able to, okay, what trust
Mhm.
as much information as I can get about how we work, but going back to what Dr. David Barnhart said earlier about survival, and thoughts of things, are based in survival, and we're always moving in that direction, but and sometimes those thoughts are not, and then we go, wait a minute, I don't need that, I don't need this to make me happy.
Right.
But this feeling that I get that's connected to this thought of I want this, and whether it's seeing an attractive person, if you're, and you're not being able to help the thought, that's based on this innate perpetuation of the species and for survival and getting the most out of life that I can. Oh, but we can go on.
Mhm.
As long as we just choose not to act on those kinds of things, the thoughts, they're based on, we know better, but we can't stop those things, and that they don't mean that we're sinful if we have them.
Mhm.
If we make plans to get those kinds of things, hurt people, and to do things that we're not, that are not helpful, then that's a different story. But having these thoughts is all based in survival.
Mhm.
And God, who made us that way? God made us that way.
Right. Well, and I think it's important, especially the one about lust, because people do have a lot of sexual concerns about. Well, oftentimes that's a symptom for not only for OCD, but even people without OCD. I talked to a young man who was engaged to be married, and he was expressing concern that he was having lustful thoughts about his fiancée. And I said, well, would you like us to pray for God to take away your sexual desire for your fiancée? And he said, no. But so that just for the record, that particular verse in the Sermon on the Mount, the Greek word means the same thing as covet. And so when Jesus, translating it, lust is a choice. You could translate it as, if you look at a woman in order to covet her. So in other words, Jesus is tying this concept of adultery which is one of the commandments, one of the 10 commandments, to the concept of coveting, which is another of the commandments. So he's saying, just because you're not sleeping around doesn't mean that you're, not coveting. So I think there's a translation issue there. And also, if you read the Bible, Song of Solomon is one of the most erotic texts in the history of the world. And as you said, God made us with sexual desire so that we would continue as a species. So I think there's plenty of evidence that sexual desire is not the same thing as lust, for one thing, or covetousness, but that through conditioning we begin to think of our natural experiences as being somehow wrong. And there was something else you said a minute ago about baseball, the uncertainty is part of what makes it fun. Like I think about how much of life, if you're seeking safety, you're not going to be happy because life's just not going to be as much fun.
You're not going to play the game.
That's right. Not knowing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not knowing who's going to win, not knowing how
Right.
the outcome's going to happen. You know, that's why people watch it, you know.
Yeah. Right. If you knew what was going to happen, it would be like, if someone told you, oh yeah, like you recorded a game to watch later and someone says, oh yeah, your team wins, you'd be like,
Yeah.
thanks a bunch,
Yeah.
jerk.
Yeah. Yeah. So all the things that we're talking about are, you know, we've become, you know, more knowledgeable in science and understanding how the brain works, and knowing that a lot of these things are based on just a primal survival, perpetuation of the species kind of a need.
Mhm.
The value of that is to be able to say, okay, this is going to come up. How often am I going to stay there? Am I going to spend too much time thinking about someone that I, you know, covet? That's different than having a thought and it being, you know, I don't, you know, we don't want to have that thought. I feel bad about that. You know, that's different. It's different when you recognize, wow, that was a really selfish thought that I had. You know, I wanted, you know, something bad to happen to that person that I don't really care for. It's, man, oh, that's not good. You know, I couldn't help that, but it doesn't mean I'm a bad person. It's just something that happens. And then religion, and whatever that is for us, to me, is designed to help us navigate that, not set aside a really strict set of rules that makes you good or bad based on these rules.
Yeah.
It's the spirit of all of it in context.
Mhm.
When we do treatment, part of what we're doing is emphasizing the engagement in valued activities. We don't just treat OCD or anxiety or depression as okay, well, we've got this narrow set of things to do, but part of it is to engage in behavior that we value. So spending time and doing things like playing with your kids, or doing some volunteer work to help somebody else in the community. Those activities actually help us feel a part and help us feel better psychologically, reduce our suffering by being engaged in the things that we actually value.
Yeah. Yeah. When I think about like the example of Jesus, you know, he's going to weddings. He's going off to, and he's going off by himself to get alone time because he's had enough time being around people. So I think about, or he's, you know, he's engaging in things that he enjoys doing. And I think the same thing is like you look at other spiritual leaders, and you think, who do I want to be like if someone isn't able to enjoy life? That's not usually someone you want to be like. I think I realize people have different theological beliefs about dancing, but there's a great quote that says, never trust a spiritual guru who doesn't dance, you know.
Let's make that a motto. So Dave, how do you feel that, and this is, you know, church little c, is dealing with mental health?
So there's actually been a lot more awareness in the last few years about mental health. I think just as a general social awareness, I've seen some churches addressing things like depression. A lot of churches now do blue Christmases, recognizing that, you know, Christmas season can make some people's depression feel worse because they feel like I'm different than everybody else. Everybody else is happy and I'm not, you know. And I see that being addressed more in churches. domestic violence is being addressed more by churches. Local church recently had a series, in fact, where they, talked about domestic violence and that sort of thing. I think, you started off talking about how oftentimes churches have seen psychology and therapists and mental health as a competition. Like if people are getting well outside of church, then they're not going to come here to get well, or to find what they need. And I think I think more people understand that that's, you don't go to the grocery store for home improvement needs typically. I mean, we have different institutions, different organizations for different purposes. And you're not going to get all your spiritual needs met by going to therapy, most likely, although there might be spirituality involved. And you're not going to get your mental health needs met just by going to church. So I think there's a lot of emphasis on, I think, on people knowing how to refer when they're out of their specialty. But a large part of it really does have to do with what kind of training and education pastors have. A lot of times people come to pastors and the pastors don't know to refer. Like they're not aware that this is a mental health issue and someone needs to seek counseling.
Yeah. And at the other end, there are pastors who not only refer, but in some cases where there's a financial need, the church will pay for therapy. And,
Yes.
we see that happening.
Yeah. So yeah, our church does that. There are people we encourage to be in counseling and to make that happen. If you're trying to create life change in someone, you really need a team. And in my understanding, that's really what the church is about. You need a team to help you make the life changes that you want to make.
Yes. And then, sometimes you see churches really step up in that. I'm remembering way back when, I've been around a long time, when the AIDS issue was at the forefront, and it took a team of people. A lot of churches did this, gathered a team of people. There might be 10, 15 people taking care of one person that had AIDS. And this is before treatments became effective, and so we were taking food and driving people places and doing that kind of thing. And that's really, it takes a team. And some churches do this kind of thing, trying to provide some mental health support by having, there's a process or an organization called Stephen's Ministry.
Right.
And these are members of the congregation who become trained to really listen to people. I don't know, you guys, somebody determined that there's actually a skill in listening. So, and what a benefit that is. So I've referred people to Stephen's ministers in order to, and they're not necessarily limited to the church they attend. They're willing to reach out and be an ear, and communicate with somebody and be a support. That's pretty good involvement. So Dave, his power went down on his computer, and he may connect again here with his phone. And when he does, maybe we could wrap it up and think about what some of the topics would be that we would address down the road.
Well, one of the things I was just thinking about is that many people who come in to our office and have issues with anxiety that are that have strong spiritual beliefs, that needs to be a benefit to them. We talk about thinking that's helpful and unhelpful, and one of the processes of of determining, of that is okay. You talked about the go far test. Does it meet our goal? Is it help us get along with others? Helps feel better, alive, reality. So now that I've determined that that's not helpful, a helpful thought, what do I do with that? I can't help but think it. It's like, the pink elephant thing. Don't think about a pink elephant. Don't think about lust. Don't think about, then you think about it. And now you feel, oh my gosh, I'm having these thoughts. Well, you're going to have the thoughts, but we need somewhere to redirect those thoughts. And sometimes spiritual quotes are huge in being able to go, oh, I'm having this thought of guilt and I'm a bad person or whatever. What do my spiritual beliefs help me? How can I redirect my thoughts towards a biblical quote that's helpful, that helps me feel grace, that helps me feel whole, that helps me feel trust of God, or whatever, what it helps me deal with uncertainty.
Right. Yeah.
The birds thing that you said earlier, Dave, is a perfect example of that. It was, to me anyway, it was, that quote was not about you shouldn't worry, you're in trouble because you're worrying, and why are you anxious? That means you don't trust me and you're wrong. It's
Right.
The birds aren't worried, the birds get taken care of. So when you do have worry, because you're going to, it's part of survival, you can choose to trust me, maybe like the birds do. And so that's a really good example of a scriptural piece that becomes a cognitive strategy to go, I'm not going to focus on this negative thought that doesn't help me. I'm going to focus on, I can trust God because it says right there that the birds are okay. So I can practice thinking that way. And then when my mind goes the other way and has a hard time with uncertainty, which is natural and normal, I'm just going to redirect it over towards this scriptural quote. And that can help me redirect my thinking, because this thought is based in the scriptures and I believe in that. And so I'm going to use that to my advantage. So the idea of mental health and religious beliefs can very, very easily go hand in hand with each other.
If you want to live longer,
Yeah.
be a member of a church, right? Or a group, a spiritual group. So there's plenty of evidence of that. And so one of my favorite atheists really makes that recommendation. He says, hey, you want to set yourself up to live longer? Have a support group. And you often find those in, churches, synagogues, mosques, and the like. So have a group that has a spiritual essence. What do you think? Is that maybe that's something we could talk about going down the road, the benefits of having a spiritual connection with other people?
Yeah, I think that's huge, because I also, we were talking about the Sermon on the Mount a minute ago. When Jesus addresses that to his followers, he says y'all. It's really a second person plural, and he's talking to a group of people. And the notion is, you guys are supposed to help each other do this stuff. And yeah, I mean, like, you need a support team, you need a group of people around you. Because we're not just isolated individuals. I think that's part of this, part of the gist of certainly my faith tradition, Christianity, but also many faith traditions, is that you don't do this on your own. Yeah.
A group of people who are also flawed.
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes.
And that keeps a lot of people away from church too. Is that,
right.
Those people are judgmental, and they're,
or I'm not good enough.
I've heard the people are judgmental a lot more than I'm not good enough. I mean, that's just my experience, is that that keeps people away.
True.
I'm more about truth, and and I don't want to go there and feel judged. I think that's a big thing in organized religion that turns people away, is that they feel that there's too much judgment there. So we're not growing the kingdom if we're doing that kind of thing.
Well,
So
yes.
yeah, good first discussion on issues related to religion.
Excellent.
Absolutely.
So we'll do it again.
All right.
Sure.
Well, thanks everybody for watching, listening. Like it. Join,
Yeah.
subscribe. We have how many subscribers? Are we up to 40 yet?
Oh, yes, we're over 40.
We're over 40.
We're over 40.
And 28 are my family members, I think.
There we go. Exactly. So we're all working on our families. Also, southeastocd.com is one of our websites. Behavioralsciencesofalabama.com is another of our website. And Dave, where's your blog where you're talking about mental health? Where's that located?
So you can get that from davebarnhart.net. It's just my name.net. That's where I've posted those. And if anyone's interested in subscribing to the newsletter, I do a seasonal devotional series that I send out via email about once or twice a week.
All right. Mental health and religion.
Mm-hmm.
What do you want to do, Paul?
End it.
Okay. Well, we'll say goodbye then.
See you, everybody.
All right.
Bye-bye.